Hello. Good evening. Looks like we've already got a few folks in the chat. Callum, David, Ashley, hello. Welcome in. So, I'm going to be talking today about Ian Watson's Chaos Child. This is the final book from the original Boxtree series of novels for Games Workshop. So it continued on from the GW Books era back in the early days. Boxtree picked up the license in the relatively early 90s, republished a load of those original GW Books releases, and then finished off the run on a couple of different series that had been started from 1989. So Conrad was the trilogy of fantasy books that was finished, and then the Inquisitor trilogy was Ian Watson's series for 40k, the only book series for 40k published by Games Workshop at the time, and this is the final part of that trilogy. In fact, it's actually 4 books because there's also the Space Marine novel, which features one of the characters who becomes a main character in this series later on. I hope that I am live and that you heard all of that and everything came through okay. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me. If you can't hear me, then you won't hear this request, but I assume you would be saying that there's no sound. So fingers crossed everything's coming through okay, and we're going to have a good little chat about what is ultimately, I think, quite an odd novel, I suppose I would say, but not in the way that some of the other Ian Watson novels were odd. More in a way that I guess, and I don't want to pull any punches here. I think obviously, Ian Watson only passed away very recently, and that was very sad. But I'm not gonna. I don't want to. I want to respect him and as a writer and as a storyteller. So I'm going to be critical here, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that didn't work for me in this book, because there were a fair few things that didn't work for me in this book, and that didn't work for me as a trilogy of stories. I suppose the broadest criticism I have for this series of books is that it just doesn't come together. It never feels, to me at least, like individually or as a whole, anything that happens matters to anybody in the stories. Everything is just really random, and they kind of progress from thing to thing to thing. There's loads of convenient storytelling deus ex machina. There are loads of interventions by characters and villains and all sorts of stuff that just happens because that's what needed to happen for the next scene to take place. So I've got problems with these as novels, as sort of structured stories, and then I've also got problems with them in terms of the content, I suppose. But for anybody who hasn't read these stories, I'll do a quick pre-say of what the whole thing is about. Ostensibly, in reality, it's not really about anything. But the broad point is that these stories are about the Inquisitor Jack Draco and his little inquisitorial retinue, who have, early on in the first book, discovered that there is something amiss within the Inquisition, that there is actually a sort of sub-conspiracy, the Hydra, that is taking place, that's trying to overtake the Inquisition and overthrow the Imperium by ultimately mind-controlling the entire population of the Imperium so that they can be subservient and controlled, essentially. That's happening deep within the Inquisition. There is a thread going through of a sort of rival organization being led by a chap, or at least as far as we know, it is our link to it is through a chap called Zephyro Carnelian, who is the Harlequin man. He is a human who has lived a very long life. He dresses like a traditional earthbound Harlequin, so he's not actually Eldar, but he's in league with the Eldar. And they have, we discover in the second story, uncovered some kind of prophecy that is all related to a set of the Emperor's children, which is the actual sons of the Emperor that have been scattered far and wide. These are not the Primarchs. This is just a load of kids that the Emperor has sired, who theoretically have the power to come back together and to become the new men, or summon forth the new men, which is a new version of the Emperor or a good Chaos God who will help combat chaos and save the universe. So the Eldar are in favour of that, even if that's going to cost lots of lives. Probably not Eldar lives, but it's going to cost lots of that sort of stuff. So that's kind of what the second book is about. The third book is a... well, before we get to the third book, Chaos Child, there's also the novel Space Marine, which is about the recruitment and training of 3 Space Marines in the Imperial Fist chapter, one of which, Alexandro de Arquebus, becomes successfully goes through all the scouting process. In a Tyranid attack on a hive ship, they actually board a hive ship as scouts, very much like Advanced Space Crusade, and most of them die, but Lex survives, and we then rejoin him many, many years later in Chaos Child, or at the end of the previous novel, when he teams up with Jack and his squad. They all go into the webway. They try and find some sort of... they're trying to find the Black Library. There's some very cool stuff with a navigator's eye, where it gets the pathway to the Black Library inscribed on his third eye, and they end up having to remove it from his skull because he goes mad. But anybody who looks at the eye will die instantly. So there's like some really cool sci-fi ideas with stuff like that. But Jack has had a bit of a love story with an assassin who works for him, a Calidus assassin who works for him called Melindy. And in the second novel, at the very end, in the webway, she's killed by Jane Czar, no less, the Phoenix Lord. So in this book, Jack's entire being is focused just on resurrecting Melindy. He's heard that there's a crux, a sort of intersection at the very heart of the webway where time can be unwound or rewound, and he'll be able to bring back Melindy. So that is all he's about for this book. Anvil, I'm very glad that you made it. Welcome in. And Callum, trying to figure out... Yeah, they were trying to figure out what they were doing, 40k lore, and there was not a consistent direction. I think that is very, very true. What I think is really interesting with these books is that very clearly Ian Watson was making stuff up on the fly for most of it, but then there's also moments when he's obviously been handed, okay, here's a load of material that we have written in the design studio about the Eldar. So then that gets really specific and very 40k for a couple of paragraphs or a chapter where it's just like, oh, and then the Eldar forces arrived and they were doing this and they were using these weapons and they worked like this. In this book, in Chaos Child, a load of Eldar Vipers turn up and jet bikes, and they're described very, like, officially. The way in which they're talked about is all very clear and concise. So I assume that Ian Watson was given the sort of package of material about what they are supposed to do, how they're supposed to work. Anvil, can we just be clear and say that it's at least better than Conrad? Way better. So, I think the prose is better than Conrad. But I actually think that a lot of the criticisms that I have for the Conrad trilogy are also very true for this Ian Watson saga. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that, I mean, as Callum says, there wasn't a clear direction, I don't think, for these writers. They were given a lot of leeway, but there also doesn't seem to have been a lot of editorial control over this is how we want a trilogy of stories to progress. So these don't progress as a sort of mapped out arc for the characters or for the narrative. Things that were important in one book just have no place in some of the subsequent stories. Characters don't really fulfill their own storylines. There's lots of stuff that just doesn't make sense unless you're writing it a page at a time and occasionally remembering that you introduced something a chapter or two ago. They really feel like they're working through the page count. And I think that's true of both trilogies, unfortunately. I think there are some good ideas in Conrad scattered throughout, and there are scenes and moments that I quite like, but overall I didn't enjoy them. For these books as well, I think that there are some scenes that are really good. There are some ideas that I think are incredible, and that I think are really, really clever science fiction ideas. There's stuff with the eye and the inscribing of the eye, because the navigator, Gogol, looked I think it was. Oh no, it was the later. It was Azul, the later navigator, had looked at the way to the Black Library, or I can't remember. The rune came up, and the rune inscribed on his eye, and he died. So they had to remove it, but they couldn't look at it. That's such a great sort of pulpy sci-fi idea. It's grim, but it's also something you can only do in these kinds of science fantasy stories. Really, really great. Things like that are really good moments, and there's some cool things of that nature scattered throughout. But boy, did I find this book to be a slog. It was very tough for me to read. Now, obviously, this is all just my opinion, so I'm sure there are people who love these books. I think if I read these, I think there may have been some sweet spots some time ago. Not when I was a lot younger, because I just wouldn't have finished them. But maybe in my 20s, potentially, I might have found like that moment where I had enough time to invest, and there were cool ideas, and it bubbled away. But I wasn't too put off by the sort of drudgery of some of it. So, yeah, I don't know. But I do think these are in a similar space for me, at least, to the Conrad trilogy. And I know people look back on both of these trilogies with a lot of fondness, and I can totally understand that. Oh, you're right, David. Yeah, Lex scrimshawed the eye. It is the map through the webway that gets automatically inscribed onto the eye in this book. Forgive me, I've conflated two separate eye inscribing incidents in two books. But yeah, David, you're totally right. So, yeah, and I think that this is the other thing. There's a lot of repetition. So there's great ideas and very cool things like this eye. Nobody can look at it, but you have to look at it if you want to find the Black Library. That's a fantastic idea. And they have to come up with, they sort of Star Trek it and come up with a scientific way to look at it without looking at it and so on. But then he does that again in this book with the map of the webway and how to make their way through the webway. And there's a load of other stuff with that upset me quite a lot. But we'll get to that. So in Chaos Child, right, this book, what's it about? What is Chaos Child about? Why is it called Chaos Child? I'll take a moment and say hello to Lewis. Good to see you in. Watson says that he got given very clear instructions as to what sounds all the guns made on the Page of Time thing. Watson said that he always thought he might get another book to tidy it. But yeah, and I obviously there are, without spoiling it until later, this ends with plenty of threads still left unresolved that you could resolve in a further story. But I think that given Watson had 4 full books, and these tie into his own short story, one of his short stories, he had 4 full novels to make any kind of sense with a consistent narrative. And I just don't think he was interested in that. And that's fine if that's what he was commissioned to do, and people who enjoy that. I personally want more of a sort of a narrative driving force, and I don't feel like Watson was delivering that. Things just plod around. You just go from place to place to place to place to place. Cool idea introduced, then it's discarded. Cool idea introduced, then it's discarded. There's no escalation. Things don't build on top of one another. For me, in a satisfying way. Obviously, things do continue, and you get like Lex, the Space Marine, joins the Inquisitorial retinue at the end of the previous novel, and now we've got a Space Marine. Let's see how a Space Marine who is denied access to all of his brothers and his technology and the sort of strictures and structure of the Space Marine chapter, how does he perform when he is now like on the outs with an Inquisitor who he has faith in, but an Inquisitor who's sort of gone off the rails a little bit, and they need to find their way back to something. That's a very, very interesting idea. To basically give Lex, seeing as we've seen the story of how Lex becomes the perfect Space Marine, we are now seeing how Lex how all of that training and that suffering and everything he's learned in his own novel, and now he's a supporting character. What can he bring to it? And there are things he does bring to it, and that's probably some of the more interesting stuff for me. But it just doesn't coalesce together in an interesting way, in my opinion. Oh, Anvil, you did. Thank you, Anvil. I thank you to your wife for stepping in so that you could come and so you could come and enjoy this constructively critical chat, I guess, about Chaos Child. Um, um, Fire, hello, howdy. Lewis, like a Jabba's Palace subplot where a lot of people die. Well, I mean, we'll come to that. We'll come to that Jabba's Palace subplot, and the fact that this is a 40k novel with a chapter title that is just simply orgy, which is not something I expected. But I guess I should have expected it by this point. Reading the fourth Ian Watson book, it shouldn't have been that surprising. But actually, that does tie into my broader theory of what would have made this trilogy significantly better, I think, with just a few tweaks, actually. Anvil, I agree this book is a slog, way too much of it dealing with a side plot where the characters attempt to get in a position to continue the main story. All of this book is side plots. All of it. I think there is not a single A-plot in this book. Tell a lie, the A-plot is the opening chapter, and then it is ignored for the rest of this book. So yeah, yeah, lots of B plots and C plots and Z plots. Oh, Fire, thank you. That's very nice. I appreciate that. Anvil, I think it felt more cohesive than how Conrad went from thing to thing. Anyway, sorry, the Conrad comparison is probably a distraction. Apologies to both authors. Yeah, I mean, I have made that comparison myself, and I actually do think it is warranted. And I think it speaks as much to the editorial stance, I think, of what was happening and how these trilogies were composed, as much as it speaks to the authors themselves. I don't know how quickly they turned these around. I don't know when these were written. I don't know what degree of additional editing took place for the Boxtree releases, because it seems like it wasn't an awful lot. But I think there were a lot of external factors that may have contributed to, we just need a page count. You know, you need to have done a certain amount by the time this needs to be published. And I don't want to be dismissive of the author's words. I think there are some, like I say, some good, well-written things scattered throughout, but they're just not cohesive novels, in my opinion. Mod, this book ended in a weird tangle of loose ends and a damp squib. Indeed, it did. It really did. And David, yeah, very depressed Space Marine. I think Watson can see why the setting is interesting. I think David Ferring couldn't give a shit. Well, I mean, I think he cared for. I don't know that. I get why you would have that opinion, and I think some of that is true in terms of, like, there was not quite a number of the Warhammer Fantasy authors we know just weren't fully, like, embracing the Warhammer world. I don't think Ferring is one of those so much. I just think that there is. I think that there was a target audience he was working towards, and I think that may have sort of influenced him too much to kind of just to write things in a bit of a Saturday cartoony kind of way, like things could just happen, and that's fine. Without enough justification or sort of narrative kind of complexity. I don't know. It didn't quite work for me. Martha has joined us. It is very warm here. In our little broom cupboard, so I think Martha's just gonna lounge down here. I'll tell you what. We'll do. I got a second camera, and some of you may have seen this shot, but this is so you can see Martha. It's not strictly speaking a Martha cam, but it is an opportunity for Martha to be on screen, which I'm always a fan of. Any excuse. But I actually really like the really dark kind of unresolved ending. That really worked for it. I thought it was a high point for the book and even this trilogy. Okay, that's interesting. We'll come back. We'll come back to that. Callum, franchise writing can be very different to writing your own stories, and I think that style of working just didn't suit him. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a part of it for both authors, in fact. Recently finished the Lando trilogy from Star Wars, which is similar, pulpy, proto-universe. Sometimes it's good to see things from the beginning. That's very true, and I think actually that's one of the real joys of having read these books now, is I think that they tell us so much about like what was not known. You know, even at this time, because this was released in what, 93, 94? I think Harlequin was 93, maybe. Let's have a look. This was 95, so Harlequin could have been 94 theoretically. But I think what's really interesting is that's you know, you're if 40k is like 6 years old, 7 years old at this point, it would have been written closer to that. Obviously, there's been loads of material during that time. We've had second edition. The universe has kind of started to become something more concrete and complete. But it's also full of very ill-defined spaces. You know, and there hasn't been another 40 years of what happened over there. How does that relate to this? How does that relate to this? So kind of everything's up for grabs. And I think you can see that. You see it in the Warhammer novels, which were obviously written earlier than this one. But I think in 40k, it just goes to show how much stuff was just being sort of formulated on the fly. And some stuff stuck, and some stuff just fell away. But really, it was just an opportunity to go, well, this could be cool. You know, maybe religion works like this. Maybe science works like that. And some of that was neat. And some of it was just kind of off the wall and very bizarre. And maybe a bit too challenging for me, at least. But yes, right. Let's just hit the major beats of this story. So it opens on Ulthwé. So we've had Jack and his his inquisitorial retinue, which is now only Grim the Squat, who's been with him since the start, and now he's got a space marine called Lex, who has abandoned his battle brothers because for some reason he feels like Jack is on a sort of important mission for the Emperor, so he's going to go into the webway and help him out. Melindy, the assassin, is killed at the end of the last novel. And there was a ritual taking place within the Black Library so that they could steal this book, what is called the Book of Rana Dandra, which is about the complex mythology and cosmos of the universe and whether or not a new god can be created and whether the Emperor is a god and he's got kids and all of that stuff. It's very MacGuffin-y. It also has a name, and I'm going to get really, really petty on this. There's a lot of names in these books that just don't roll off the tongue in a very satisfying way, in my opinion. So the Book of Rana Dandra, I don't like saying it. I know this is really, this is very on me. It doesn't sound very Eldar. It really, for whatever reason, it really reminds me of Elora Danan from Willow, which is also a name that's it isn't quite right to my ear for the Willow universe. Rana Dandra just doesn't sound quite right for me to 40k, especially to Eldar. Yeah, it doesn't quite land. There's a few other names in here that I just took a bit of issue with reading. There is the planet of Sabulorb or Sabulorb, which just I don't like reading it. And then there's also the Shooterburn brothers, who are like underworld figures. Again, it just is a bit awkward to say, and therefore when I'm reading and hearing it in my head, it just sounds awkward to me. But that's very personal. Those are personal things about the names that I just didn't get on with. But the book starts. So Anvil, the Harlequin man does turn up in the first chapter of this book. So he's very, very briefly in it. In the first chapter, we're actually on Ulthwé. We get to see Eldrad, and he is basically telling everybody off because these rituals that have taken place in the webway have summoned chaos into the webway. So Jack has caused some major problems. There are also the forces of chaos descending on Ulthwé. There's some really cool visuals because they're having this conversation in a sort of arboretum on the side of the craft world, and that is pierced by there's these sort of trees that grow up, and then that's pierced by the chaos ships that enter the atmosphere of the craft world and invade. So you get this big opening chapter that is full of consequences from the previous book. It kind of says everything that happened in Harlequin is really important, everything that happened in the webway is important. The book is important. The story that we're about to read in this novel is important to the fate of the universe. That's great. There's consequences and there are stakes. So I was lulled once again. I was lulled into an exciting sense of anticipation where I thought, okay, this is going to be an interesting story. We're going to see what happens next. We get Zephyro Carnelian is told off by, I forget the name, something in the vein of Rafifi, not the film, but like a name like that for one of the other Farseers, which again is a name that doesn't feel very Eldari to me, but is a superior to Zephyro Carnelian, but a follower of Eldrad Ulthwym. But anyway, Zephyro Carnelian's mentioned there. He's there and he's told off. Then we never see him again. So the guy who is this sort of enigma who instigates the Inquisitor book, or at least instigates Jack's involvement in this broader quest that we've been following now for 2 books and into this 3rd one, that character has nothing to do. He doesn't come back. So there's no ending for Zephyro Carnelian. We learn a lot about him through like his conversations with Grimm and his conversation with Eldrad. So we do learn some stuff, but we just don't get an awful lot of like why he cares so much, why he's really trying so hard, why he cares about Jack. We don't know for sure if he is a good guy. He's allied himself with the Eldar, but he is human and he cares about humans. So, okay, I guess he's a good guy. But yeah, nothing further with him. So that's kind of like thrown out of the narrative. The Eldar do return, and we do get some more Eldar, but they are so unbelievably kind of... They feel very much just like plot devices. They turn up as when there is a need to advance the plot. Oh, we need a new way to move the story forward. I guess the Eldar turn up and they help move it along a little bit, but they don't really themselves do anything else. Like that's the extent of the Eldar and their involvement in this narrative as well. So what was arguably the main focus of at least the 2nd book, Harlequin, is kind of meaningless here. At least I felt that. You know, the prophecy, I suppose you could argue that the prophecy is an Eldar prophecy. The Eldar, and Eldrad in particular, wants Jack Draco to be possessed by a demon so that they can cast the demon out and make him invulnerable to chaotic influence and corruption. And then he can help bring about the positive end of the universe. Okay. So that's ostensibly what this novel is going to be about. Jack wrestling with his sort of moral compass and building up to getting possessed by a demon, using the Book of Ranadandra to defeat the demon, and then saving the universe. Except that's not what Jack Draco's interested in, really. He's only interested in bringing back to life his former lover, Melindy, the assassin, who has just died. And he spends such a long time sort of moping around and becoming obsessed about this. And then we get like a really dark series of events where a thief has broken into their base and she's trying to steal the Book of Ranadandra because it's covered in jewels, looks expensive. She has no idea what it really is. And they capture her. And then they force her to use polymorph so that she looks like Melindy. And then they keep her around and they basically train her to become a sacrifice, a vessel that the spirit of Melindy can be poured into and taken over. But there's also, and forgive me, a bit of a trigger warning here, there is also the suggestion that there is some abuse of this character, Raquel. She is exploited in many different ways, physical and otherwise, and the novel doesn't have any real issue with this. And this is where I think you get to, like, I think what is arguably the most interesting reading of this trilogy, or 4 books with Space Marine, is that actually this is all a story about how a quote-unquote good man, an Inquisitor, no less, and a Space Marine can slowly become corrupted by chaos until the point that they are so far gone and so in the thrall of chaos that they don't even realize they're doing evil things all the time, that they're heretical, that they're villains, but they are completely subsumed by chaos. And I think that that's a way more interesting read of this series of books, of like how you so you start with the first Inquisitor novel, which I actually did like. It had troubles, it had problems, but I think it's a good sci-fi 40k book from a different age. And it positions Jack as he's taciturn, he is a bit cruel, he's short and curt with his own people. But that's an Inquisitor. You know, there's no good guys in 40k. Inquisitors in particular are of the Imperium, and the Imperium is full of bad guys. There's a lot of practical decisions that will cost millions of lives made. All of that kind of stuff is really interesting. So that's the setup for Jack, and then in Space Marine we get the actual journey of becoming a Space Marine, how you become a celebrated, decorated Space Marine captain. Go through all of that, give up everything in order to become like one of the Emperor's chosen. And then we see him become corrupted as well because of the charisma, or at least the sort of power of this Dark Inquisitor's journey. And I think that that's a way more interesting story. And I think that it happens in really interesting ways. Like, over the course of this, you kind of get like, oh, we're going to have to make this sacrifice. We're going to have to make this decision. We're going to have to do this, that, and the other. And they slowly become more and more like aligned with chaos over the course of the novel. A lot of it's like, okay, we're going to have to break into like the courthouse in order to get a convenient translator disc for the Eldar language. And we might have to kill some guys, and I guess that's okay. Like, it's, you know, arbitrators, even though they're ostensibly we're on the same side. I'm undercover, I'm on the lam. I know that the Inquisition has been corrupted, so I guess it's all okay. And then so on and so forth. There's like more and more of these moral decisions, which are darker and darker, even down to the point when Jack is like, I guess I'm going to have to put on a dead Chaos Space Marines armor. And you can read the book as if there's no consequences to that. Actually, it works out great because the armor becomes empowered by the Emperor or something, and you get this kind of thing of Jack is then able to save Lex, who has been taken by Chaos, and they've tried to corrupt him as well. So you have these two guys who are both now in Chaos armor, both being corrupted by Chaos and possessed by Chaos demons and Tzeentchian evils, and then they are both able to evade that without consequence. And I quite like the idea that they think that they evaded it without consequence because of their faith in the Emperor, but actually, maybe they didn't. Maybe they have become corrupted by Tzeentch. They just don't want to believe it. And then their subsequent actions would sort of support that read, I think. So yeah, I quite like that. I quite like taking it in that way. And I think the story kind of progresses in a more interesting direction if you see the whole thing as the Chaos Child. The Chaos Child that is being birthed is this entire inquisitorial retinue becoming followers of Chaos. Like, they are the Chaos Child themselves. It is growing within them, and over the course of 4 books, we find out how loyal, faithful believers in him on Earth become disciples of Chaos. That, I think, is cool. I also think that's very 40k as well. I don't think that they necessarily would ever go for that, because you're like, oh, Space Marines going evil and Inquisitors going evil. We want them to be the poster children, the heroes of the story. But I think that could have been great. I think that could have been really good. Anvil, all the stuff with the thief is one of the darker things I've read. Extremely dark. I agree Watson didn't treat it with enough care, but I did like how screwed up it shows Jack and his team to be. Yeah, I mean, I think it is an interesting subplot, and there's a really good discussion between Lex and Jack, where Jack is saying we all need to make sacrifices if we're going to save the universe, and in order to save the universe, I need to bring Melindy back because she completes me. So Jack's logic is utterly flawed from the off. He's like, I need her so that I can save the universe. Like, he's very, very selfish. But he's saying we need to make sacrifices in order to achieve this. And Lex says, well, you're not making the sacrifice. Raquel is making the sacrifice because you're going to sacrifice her. And there's quite that, like, that's really interesting. You can have these moments where Lex, because he's kind of the moral compass, because he is the most faithful out of all of them. He's kind of questioning some of this, and you get some stuff with Grimm and Lex both sort of seeing Raquel for the woman that she is, and knowing that Jack is not doing something that's quite right, but they still go along with it. There's actually a genuinely amazing sequence when Raquel escapes into the webway whilst the others are sleeping, and Grimm goes and chases her, and she's not sure where to go. So he catches up with her, and he says, you've got to come back with me. And she makes him swear an oath on his ancestors that she will survive, that they're not just going to sacrifice her. She doesn't know about Melindy and how that's going to work, but she's obviously worried that something's going to happen. And you get this real, like, equivocation from Grimm where he's like, this is going to cost me my soul. If I do this, if I lie under oath on my ancestors for Jack, then I know that's a huge price to pay, and I don't think Jack's even going to care. And obviously Jack doesn't care. But, like, that's fascinating. That's so much more interesting, because that is all of the stuff of, like, okay, this is all building up. These are the corruptions that are happening, like, moment by moment by moment. The things that they are doing to Raquel in the name of saving the universe, but actually just selfishly saving Melindy because Jack loves her. Like, that's fascinating. And it also continues one of the more interesting parts, I think, of the previous book, which is the love story between two utterly broken people, Jack and Melindy. Melindy has been raised as an assassin, like, all her life. She's been broken down by the training and by the temple. And, like, it's completely faithful to the cause as a result of that. Similarly, Jack has been through, like, that for the Imperium and for the Inquisition as well. So these two people have been broken by the 41st millennium, by the Imperium and how it works in their respective areas, in order to become tools of the Imperium, hyper-specialized weapons that can be deployed for different things. And then they are these two broken people who fall in love. And I think that that's quite cool. So that story, I think, was more interesting. I think Melindy's death, whilst used as a bit of a fridging incident for Jack, you know, it's obviously designed to create shock and, like, sympathy and pain for the male main character. And then this novel would be better off, if you're going to do that, this novel, I think, would be better off if that is then an important step in his journey to chaos. So that's my thoughts on it, in terms of this sort of chaotic thing. Oh, there's also, of course, the orgy sequence with the Shooterburn brothers. So they get Raquel to use her underworld contacts in order to get them some information so that they can break into the courthouse. They do that meeting at a sex club where there is kind of a mind warped snake lady who can go into people's minds and kind of give them the sort of perfect psychic, like, release, I guess. Kind of, I guess, a really creepy, pervy version of the mind that the in Demolition Man when they wear the sort of the mind helmets that allow you to have sex psychically, that kind of thing. But because of Jack's presence and his slow conversion to chaos, as I see it, that then corrupts that entire club, and then there's just a massacre. So actually, chaos is invited into what is already sort of a Slaneshi kind of thing, but isn't ostensibly, it isn't actually. But yeah, you kind of get this really interesting thing there. Anvil, did they fall in love actually? Jack certainly did in some way, but I don't think I ever really got the impression that Melinda did. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I think it's a very fair question, one that I would have loved for Ian Watson to explore in more detail. What is Melinda's perspective? We are never given it in any kind of concrete way. We know that she's all about the sort of duty and the sacrifice, but I think they also slept together a second time, which is suggested, and I think it is suggested in the book, as being less of a... It wasn't just a practical consideration. Like the first time they did, it was in order. It was some sort of physical requirement. They had to do it. The second time, I don't think it was. I might be misremembering there. So I think there is the suggestion that there's something more to them, but I also agree it would have been great to get Melinda's perspective in a more... in a better way. David, choosing my words very carefully. I think it's called limerence. He's obsessed. He is obsessed. But I think that there has the potential. There is the potential for that to be part of a really interesting story. I tell you what, something else that was a real miss for me, and it's such a shame. So the reason that they are on the planet Sabulorb, I don't know how people pronounce this, Sabulorb. There's no good way. It's kind of Star Warsy, I think, that name, in a bad way, to me. But there you go. But yeah, they're on this planet. The reason they end up here is because this is the planet that Melinda was on in her previous short story that is in the Deathwing book. So the Alien Beast Within takes place on this planet. That is the story of how Melinda was turned into a Genestealer hybrid assassin. So that was sent to take out a load of a Genestealer cult. So that's interesting. This is part of Jack's obsession. He takes her to that planet in order to... So he goes to that planet to try and get close to Melinda or something. He doesn't really know what he's going to do there. He just needs to translate the book of Rana Dandra. So they're going to go to just a backwater planet, which I can't imagine would have access to Eldar translations, but there you go. He goes to this planet, and there's this whole thing set up for it. Every 50 years, they do a celebration of the Emperor where they unveil the true face of the Emperor. And the whole thing is set up over the course of many chapters as being this like major thing. Pilgrims come from other planets in the solar system. It's this huge thing that takes over the whole city. We get riots because there's going to be a delay, or there's some sort of there's a fear of corruption with it, with the face reveal. So there's this whole thing about the religion and the belief in the Emperor. But we also know that this is a planet that has been corrupted, or at least in part infected with Genestealers in the past. Obviously, we know that Melinda took out a Patriarch and presumably was able to deal with some. We also know that Space Marines turned up at some point in the last 50 years to wipe them out as well. But you've dangled this carrot, or this thread, this what ultimately is a red herring, I guess. But the suggestion that this is a world that may have been totally compromised by Genestealers, but nobody knows it yet. And we're going to have a face reveal. The true face of the Emperor is going to be revealed. And we're building up over the course of many chapters to this moment where we've just had a riot and we've had a load of arbitrators killed. We're about to get the face reveal, the true face of the Emperor. I don't know about anybody else who read this book, but I was 100% expecting this to be a Genestealer thing. That we were going to reveal the true face of the Emperor, and it was going to be the four-armed Emperor. And actually the big reveal is, no, the Genestealers are here, and the religion is the Genestealers, and that's going to throw the whole planet into turmoil, and then advance the plot that way. Which kind of feels like it would have made more sense, if I'm honest, because that doesn't happen. You do just get the regular face reveal. It is just the regular Emperor, and all of that thread is just meaningless. It does nothing. At the most, it introduces the temple that Raquel will later break into in order to get hold of a bone, a reliquary of Space Marine thigh bone that Lex can then scrimshaw. That's all it does. So why did we spend all of this time on this potential like thread, like setting up the whole Gene Stealer thing, setting up the true face of the Emperor, setting up the riots, setting up the potential for this thing to happen, so that might then open the door to breaking into the courthouse and being able to do some stuff. It just doesn't come to anything. All of that time is totally wasted, and then later on, we still need there to be riots and warfare, so the Eldar and the Chaos Marines have to turn up. So Watson already had built in a sort of organically progressing storyline that would have led to a war on the planet, and instead of just going with that, he just has totally random, out of nowhere, and this did upset me, guys, out of nowhere, Magnus the Red turns up, and we just get one scene with him going, I want that Jack Drake, bring me that Jack Draco, sending Chaos Space Marines to this random planet to try and take out Jack Draco. What are you talking about? I'm sorry. I am sorry, but why? Why? So we've had Eldrad turn up at the start of the book and do nothing. We had Jane Zar turn up. At least she killed someone, and it was quite impressive. But like, you've got these major names from the 40k universe, even at this time, early in the 40k universe's story, just turning up, just popping in, just like a cameo in the MCU for no reason. Instead of it being Chaos Marines, could it have been Gene Stealers? You could have just had a Gene Stealer breakout, and that would have made more sense. Under the cover of that, the riots, the battles, the Imperial Guard, whatever else, the Eldar could have been moving around, stealthing about, trying to get the book back. You still could have had that exactly the same, but it just would have felt more organic, I think. So, maybe I'm complaining because I'm like, how would I have done this? But it just doesn't. It just feels super disjointed, because it's thing after thing after thing that is like, oh, and then randomly this happens, and then randomly this happens, and so like, randomly Magnus the Red now decides it's time to invade the planet with Chaos Marines. Just so happens that there's two Imperial Guard squadrons about to take off from, like, one is come onto the planet to escort the other one off, so they can get involved in the battle. Just so happens that actually the planet's off its axis and is about to fall into the sun, so it's going to be completely destroyed. So now that battle is happening at the same time that the planet is baking. So we're going to have to leave the city, and the entire city is destroyed. There's just all of these things that are so arbitrary, but they don't serve any Yeah. Yeah, it did get under my skin a little bit, this one, because it didn't feel like it rewarded my attention as much as I think it should have. I think every time there's something really cool and you're like, oh wow, that's a really interesting idea, you've kind of set this up to be quite fascinating, it doesn't then capitalize on its own setup. Watson doesn't want to explore that. He doesn't really want to explore what would happen, like the Gene Stealers being involved. He doesn't. I don't think he really wants to explore Jack Draco all that much, because Jack Draco's barely, like, he's in this entire book and he's obviously present for the entire book. He doesn't really do anything. He just kind of. There's no forward momentum to this book. They land on this planet. Ostensibly, they land on this planet because they want to translate the Book of Ranadandra. But they spend so long buying limousines and just hanging out. It is bizarre. I really don't understand. What are they doing? There were so many points in the book where it just felt like, why are they doing this? They've now got this thief, Raquel, and they want to turn her into Melindy. Why? They're now hanging out with the underworld Shaturban brothers. Why? They're breaking into the courthouse, I guess because they want to get hold of the translation disc. Oh, and conveniently, the only other Inquisitor, it might have been an Inquisitor, the only other sort of authority figure who knows about the coming of the Eldar happens to tell Raquel this and then get killed. So now that, it's just all these convenient moments. It's just very, very convenient stuff. things just happen. In that same sequence, we had during the massacre at the orgy, there was a moment where Lex just bites the finger off a guy in order to get his ring, which has a data disk in it, and he keeps the finger in his mouth for the entire rest of the action sequence and the escape, and then now detected. So it's Deus Ex Machina. It's just completely arbitrary. It happens at random, but also Raquel was breaking into the courthouse. She was planning to do that anyway because she's a master thief. So either she could have told them about this already, or she could have just used her master thief skills. So it's just like, why are you doing this? Why has that now been introduced as like a random thing? Just another bit of random sort of lore, I guess. I don't know. It just thing upon thing that kind of was like, why are we doing this? What's this extra purpose? We're just doing this because it's something, I guess, that's kind of cool and random. Lewis, I really like your idea about chaos corruption. I think one of the hardest questions in Warhammer, and I think even Horus Heresy books struggle with this, is why get involved with chaos. Yeah, I agree. And I think actually, like I say, if this whole series of books, and I'm now committing to this, for me, with the exception of the very end, this series of books is just about people being corrupted by chaos, and that's the whole story. Like, this is a story of chaos corruption, how it happens, and it happens without you realizing it. Not for everybody. I'm sure there's some people who are like, I'm going to turn to chaos because I want the power, and that's obviously a very strong narrative in and of itself. But I think for these guys who are good, ostensibly good guys within the universe, the Imperium's greatest warriors, their journey to chaos corruption, I think, is quite interesting. And I think also justifies Melindy's death because she was uncorruptible, because she was the only one who wouldn't have fallen for this, basically. Like, I think that becomes quite an interesting element of a story. Anvil, I guess I don't disagree too much, but I don't mind it too much personally. Chaos folks were attacking Ulthwé earlier in the story. Blah blah. Wartmag, Book of Dandruff has left its stronghold. Yeah, you absolutely, like, it is justifiable that Chaos would be interested in the book, and that they want to get involved. But like, why is it Magnus? And why this for Ian Watson as the author? And it's totally brazen in that. Like, obviously, like, authorial fiat happens all the time in writing. Things happen because now's when it needs to happen for the plot to progress. That's absolutely fine. Everyone does it all the time. However, it's at its best when you don't realize it's happening. I think this is the difference between early and late Game of Thrones as a TV show, for instance. There's loads of stuff that's totally arbitrary happening in early Game of Thrones, but it's satisfying in how it is executed. So much so that the arbitrary sort of nature of it doesn't really bother you, or at least didn't bother me. But in later series, things are happening all the time arbitrarily, and that becomes a problem. And I think that's what's happening here. It's just stuff is happening, and it's really obviously just, I guess this is when it has to happen. And I just don't like it when that happens. David, almost like there's a bigger story happening that we're not shown, and we're stuck following Jack, who's in a bit of pit of depression while the real events happen outside. Yeah, I agree, and I think that that's a really bad decision. Classic sort of writing of you want to jump in when the story, at the very moment the story gets interesting. Except we're not allowed. We're jumping in at the moment the story gets the dullest possible, because we're actually reading now about an Inquisitor who isn't an Inquisitor anymore, who has stopped caring about saving the universe. Like, the whole point of the whole story of Chaos Child is Jack Draco not saving the universe. He spends the entire time just sort of caring about himself. He only wants to find a way to bring back the woman that he loves, whether she wants it or not, whether Raquel wants it or not, whether Lex and Grimm want it or not. He's going to spend his entire time doing that. Like, he's properly evil in this book. The stuff he does to Raquel is just the absolute, the biggest evidence, but there's loads of evidence. I had a good laugh at the infiltration scene with the guards just so happened to be discussing the technology. Raquel is there to steal as she enters the room. Exactly. exactly. And because just a few days before I was listening to a Roger Zelazny book in which the protagonist is infiltrating the antagonist's base. Two of the biggest antagonists walk past a closed door, and the hero quips something like, "If this was a poorly plotted novel, they would have been in the midst of a discussion providing me with key information. Oh well." And they say, "Nothing of interest." Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I think Watson just let himself off, and again, I think a firmer editorial hand and maybe more time, I don't know, but maybe more time to write these stories, and there wouldn't be so many moments of that convenient plotting where it's just like, oh, okay, this had to happen. These guys are talking about the very important thing. Here's a MacGuffin. I just happened to be carrying it with me when I died, and so on and so forth. Lewis, I think a lot of Watson stuff kind of reads like an early 2000 AD prog. Makes sense for about 8 pages of action, and that's it. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of that where you kind of have like a big idea and some really cool scenes built around it, and then it's like how many chapters do we have to wait to get to the next big idea? Like for instance, there's for no real reason, there's this whole sequence when the planet is getting close to the sun and it's going to burn up to a crisp. So we get chapter upon chapter of all of the refugees fleeing the city, because the city's in flames because of the war between the Chaos Marines and the Eldar, which we're not getting to see because our characters are not interested in being part of that. So it is literally saying, hey, guys, an amazingly cool action scene is happening just behind you, but we're going to spend 2 or 3 chapters talking about people just, like, desperate for water, drinking the blood of their camels, or camel leopards, and like just having a terrible time. Isn't that going to be fun? And it turns out, no, it's not fun. It would have been more fun to be part of the cool battle that 40k is about. So, you know, like it's frustrating at times like that. And all of that is so that we can get into the webway again. There is, you know, to Watson's credit, once again, and some amazing ideas. This idea of having to make your way through the webway, which we've already kind of done in the previous book, so he's revisiting something here, but at least this time it's kind of spiced up with a sort of Monsters, Inc. portal door action sequence. You know, the best bit of Monsters, Inc., when they're racing through all of the different doors, going in and out of different worlds. So you have this thing happening where they are trying to get through the webway. Jack has got a map, but they don't have precise details. So they have to find the way in, which is the reason you have the really excruciating journey through the sort of dunes. They get into the webway, and then they have to go from world to world to world, and those worlds have different cool stuff happening on them, and there's like portals at the bottom of wells, and you're jumping through one portal in the well, out of another portal in a well. There is a Tyranid chase through a forest. There is, you know, there's a war world where you've got titans. So it's like, this is all really cool. Why is this happening in the final 10 chapters? Or not even that, the final 8 chapters, 6, 7 chapters? Why is this happening then, instead of happening 20 chapters ago, when we spent so long on this boring planet of boringness doing nothing? Yeah, it frustrates me. It frustrates me because it's like, that's really cool. Why was that not like half of the novel? Half of the novel could have been this chase from world to world to world. Like, imagine like an Indiana Jones global adventure, except instead of Indiana Jones and his dad, it is Jack Draco, played by Sean Connery, and his inquisitorial retinue, that's what's left of them, having to go through all of these different worlds in the 40k universe. This one's got Tyranids on it, this one's got Orcs on it, this one's got Eldar on it, and so on and so forth. And then you've got, like, that would have been really cool. Callum, I think it's interesting to compare and contrast the Draco trilogy and the Eisenhorn trilogy in the context of the state of GW at the times they were written. Were they an attempt to do the same thing a decade apart, but Dan Abnett benefiting from a much more mature setting? Yeah, I mean, so I will admit I've not read the Eisenhorn trilogy. It's on my list. I'm very excited to do so. I understand that there is a lot of similarities, and we know that Abnett loves Ian Watson and has a lot of respect for Ian Watson. So I think it's entirely possible that that's exactly what was happening. Revisit something similar, but kind of a bit more cohesively, perhaps. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, as Anvil says, so like the darkness and the corruption amongst protagonists, the dysfunction of the Imperium, I think these things are really interesting. I think this is when Watson's probably at his best, is depicting the Imperium as a dystopian universe. So the way in which, like, religion works, so all of the stuff about the religion, this is why I was so disappointed that it didn't turn out to be anything meaningful. All of the, like, material about the religion on the planet of Sarbulob and the way in which the planet functions and all of this kind of stuff, like, that's really super interesting. Like we saw it when he had them go, where they had the characters go to the to go to see the Emperor in Inquisitor. Like the scale of religion and the import and the way it's just this obsession for the galaxy, and how so many different people's lives are completely defined by their faith in the Emperor. All of this sort of stuff is really cool. It is very, very interesting, and he explores that in really interesting ways. And there's just things he's able to bring out, details he's able to tease out of that really speak to how, like, dystopian this world, this universe is. Even the stuff with, like, the arbitrators and the courthouse and the way in which they rule the planet, all of that stuff is really good. When he talks about, like, okay, there was a Gene Stealer uprising and the Space Marines came here 50 years ago and did all this kind of stuff. There's so many cool things in there that are like, this is great background material. This is someone wrestling with the sort of the oddness of the 40k universe and the sort of incomplete nature of it at this time, and then turning it into, like, really interesting corners of the galaxy. But then you kind of, at the same time as that, you get things like the Possession, where, like, so you have this whole sequence that was really confusing to me, where Jack has put on a Chaos Marines armor, and then it becomes red and gold, and I don't think he's supposed to be a Custodes, but it becomes red and gold, and he has, like, a vision or something of Melindy sent by the Emperor, maybe. And then you also have Lex, who has been almost corrupted by Tzeentch, but is able to call out to Rogel Dawn. And I really liked this idea of, like, his battle brothers who had died in the Space Marine novel protecting him. I kind of see that more as, like, his faith in them and his faith in Rogel Dawn is what protects him. But the but the book won't let me have that, because Rogel Dawn actually empowers his hand and makes his hand into, like, a magic hand that allows him to, like, to signal and do stuff. And then later on, when they're following the map across the webway, he again has to call upon Rogel Dawn in order to, like, get divine inspiration of where they should go next. It's very grim, for want of a better word, how this has to happen. Grim the Squat has to stab him in the eye to cause pain, because that's a big thing that the Imperial Fists are all about. And through that suffering, he is able to invoke Rogel Dawn, which illuminates his finger and allows him to point in the direction that they need to go. And I didn't like that one bit. I think it's very interesting, the idea of, like, pain will bring this, and, like, blinding the Space Marine was quite an interesting idea. And again, that feels to me like, if that's not Rogel Dawn, that's Tzeentch. So that's much cooler. If he thinks he's calling out to Rogel Dawn, but he's inflicting pain upon himself, or maybe it's Slaanesh, but he's inflicting pain upon himself and making this sacrifice for Rogel Dawn, when actually he's just hobbling himself for Chaos, and Chaos are rewarding him for it, and he doesn't even realise it's Chaos who are doing it. And I also think it would have been way better if, instead of, because they have to do this twice, instead of him doing it to the same eye again, if he'd had to do it to the other eye, and we had a blind Lex by the end of the book, that I think would have been much better, a bigger sacrifice, and a more interesting story, because then he actually uses other senses, and it's this huge sacrifice. Oh, just speaking of like odd arbitrary things that are just there to fill pages. When they're in the webway, they go through. It's very cool, actually. They go through an area of the webway that the wraith ships fly through. So it's enormous, and they're worried about how they can get from one side of it to the other side of it without losing losing their bearings, because it's so vast. By the time you're in the middle, you can't see where you came from, you can't see where you're going. So they do this whole thing. It's a bit dodgy, but they like shouting, and they sort of form a human line, shouting and keeping each other in line. That's fine, I guess. But they almost get to the other side, and Lex gets blown away by a passing ship. But then they're like, "Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We're going to have to wait here just in case he comes back." And then we have a few pages, and then he just comes back. So it was just, why did that happen? It was an inconvenience for the characters that caused no change to the plot. He doesn't have to find another route. He doesn't turn up later. He just turns up. He comes back. So we just spent a whole load of pages, only a few pages, but of just having our characters sit and wait, which means we're sitting and waiting as readers, so that a character can just run back. And it served no purpose other than filled a couple of pages. And I feel like that is just an exemplar of the entire book. Like, how can I fill some pages with something happening that I guess is I guess it fills some pages. Yeah, I don't understand. Camel leopards are giraffes. Callum, yeah, that makes sense actually, because he does talk about the neck whipping, doesn't he? You're quite right. David, there was very little background info for Watson to draw from for anything other than that. Yeah, and I think there was more background information floating about, but yeah, not centralized. And that's fine, and I think that's why it's interesting to then go off and explore some stuff. But like I say, I don't think that's what Watson does a lot of the time. He does do some of that, certainly, and some of it's good and some of it's not. But he also just is turning the wheel at times. Like, there's a lot of pages and a lot of chapters in this book, and in the previous one, I think, where the A-plot doesn't progress for no reason other than, I guess, it doesn't want it to. Like, it just nothing happens. And I find that frustrating. And that's why it was quite a slog, for me at least, to read this book and the previous book. Anvil, my outrage is justified. Lewis, the Inquisitor game setting reworked the ideas of an Inquisitor's ideological Civil War stuff so well it gave Abnett a massive head start. Yeah, and I think that's the broader point. There are amazing ideas in Ian Watson's books, and I think it's hard to picture for a lot of us, for me in particular. Like, I wasn't there playing these games in 1987. I wasn't following this as it was happening. I didn't turn up until the 90s. So Chaos Child was coming out when I was just getting into the game, and I was not reading it. So, like, thinking back now to an author who was the only author who was willing to tackle the 41st millennium, none of the other authors who were all offered the chance to get involved in 40k stories turned it down. Watson was the only one that said okay. So nobody wanted to try and put their arms around this universe because it was still being formulated. It was sort of, not fully understood. I imagine that at the same time as it not being, like, cohesively written yet, there probably was also a lot of editorial mandates around what you could not do and maybe what you could do, based on GW and how it worked. So I imagine it was a very tough assignment. And I think we see how tough it was when an author like Watson, who, I think Inquisitor had good stuff in it. I think Inquisitor's the most successful of this trilogy. I think I probably enjoyed Inquisitor the most out of the 4 novels he wrote for 40k. Space Marine is my second favourite of the two. And that's mostly just for the 2 chapters on Necromunda, which I think are very strong. In fact, I think this is a thing for me with Watson. They all start really strong. I think the first couple of chapters of all 4 books are really good. And then we get into the churn when actually the promise of those first chapters is squandered, in my eyes, because we just then don't progress the plots. So the characters don't they don't follow a natural arc, and their plot does not progress in an organic way. And that frustrates me. And I know that some of it's just me and what I want to read and how my preferences coming into this sort of stuff. But yeah, they don't work for me as a whole. But there's loads of material throughout all 4 books that I think you could absolutely, and you could see it has been done, and Dan Abnett's a great example of it. But you can mine so many of the ideas from across this trilogy for cool stuff in other books, in other parts of the game world, in RPG adventures, and all sorts. There's loads of cool ideas. You can tell Ian Watson is a great science fiction author as an ideas man, like coming up with really cool things and like sequences and getting like delving into some interesting ideas, presenting a lot of interesting ideas. I've not read any Ian Watson outside of the 40k books, so I don't know if he's more effective at doing it in his own sort of non IP work. But within the context of the 40k IP, I just don't think he executes on the ideas he presents in a particularly satisfying way. I guess that's where I'm sort of coming from. Anvil, I wonder if some of the possession scene is inspired by Evil Dead, with how the possession could seemingly be in certain parts of the body. If I remember correctly, I think it's not just with Lex's hand. Yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't be too surprised, because you do get Lex finds out that he first realizes that his toe has been possessed, and then it spreads through the rest of his body. I quite liked that. That's quite interesting. But then you have this whole thing about like Lex's whole plan, and there's many of these plans that Lex has, where that Jack has, where he like assumes. I mean, I guess he's an Inquisitor, so maybe he knows for certain. But he is like, oh, I'll be able to use the Eye of Azul, which is the cursed eye, which if you look at it, it will melt you instantly. He's like, I will use this, so when I'm fully possessed, I will look at the mirror, and I will look at the eye, and that will burn the demon who's possessing me out of my soul, and I will survive. And it's like, how does that work? Why do you know that's going to work? Like, surely you're looking at it, you're both looking at it, you'll both die. Presumably, but no, it does work. It's fine. So, okay. But then Jack is like, oh yeah, okay. I guess that's proof of his sort of bona fides as an Inquisitor who knows how this stuff works. But then at the same time, he's like, I'm going to destroy my tarot, my Emperor's tarot, because it's allowing the Zephyr Carnelian to follow me and the Eldar to follow me and Chaos to find me. But I'm not going to destroy the Melindi card, because I'm obsessed, and also the Zinch demon card doesn't get destroyed either. And it's like, well, are you any good at being Inquisitor then? Like, you on the one hand doing these like amazing inquisitorial like leaps of faith, because I guess you know what's going on, and on the other hand, you're just opening yourself up to chaos corruption all the time by accident. So it frustrates me. Yeah. I mean, I think overall. Oh, Steve, hello, and Jez. Good to have you guys here. I reckon he'd have made a cracking pulp writer, but full novels may have stretched him a bit. Yeah, I think that's partly because. Yeah, I think that's maybe right in the sense that like. Because he is just stringing together like lots of different sequences of sort of relatively interesting stuff. So those would have been better short stories or novellas. Like if you would only had this sequence here and that sequence there. But he has to build loads of stuff around that, and he doesn't seem that interested in it. And he's constantly introducing threads that go nowhere. So yeah, it did frustrate me. I did take a couple of photos on my phone of lines that were interesting though. So let's see if I can remember what they were. Where are we? Because there's a lot of stuff about Tzeentch, which I thought was pretty good. There's a bit when I forget whether it was Jack or Lex who was super depressed, and that they were talking about the whole cosmos and like the potential and the like reality of the whole cosmos, and it just says a sparrow's fart the universe was, which I it's vivid language, which was kind of fun. There were what else have we got here? There was a good bit when they were talking about how, like, people who were being killed in the crossfire, the odds of being killed in the crossfire from the Eldar and Chaos War as the refugees are sort of leaving. He was saying that the chances of being killed in the crossfire was actually quite small, except for the persons actually killed, which I kind of thought was a very funny line, and is very true. Yeah, so the odds for everyone overall were minuscule, but the odds for the people who were killed were 100%, obviously. And then there was a bit, and this I think exemplifies one of my issues with the whole thing, right? So at the end, so this is when they are making their way through the desert, and they've been struggling on for 3 chapters, and they're sort of burning out and kind of struggling. And then you have the Eldar have turned up to try and reclaim the Book of the Ranadandra, and then you have this line or couple of lines. Was the rest of the Book of Fate being carried to safety by a Harlequin somewhere amidst the dwindling migration? Had the book already been rushed to the Webway portal by Viper or by Jetbike? Such questions seemed remote and meaningless. Right. And that, I think, is true. They are remote and they are meaningless, so why have you just spent 2 lines asking them? And this happens loads. There are loads of times when just out of nowhere, or just at the end of a scene, he will just say, and will Melindy actually be returned to us? We just don't know for sure. Okay. Like, then, so why are you saying that? Like, it's just these constant reminders of, like, things that have happened before, things that are happening elsewhere, and just saying that these questions are meaningless. That's true, they're meaningless, so why are you asking them? You should be spending these words telling us about the interesting things happening to your interesting characters, not spending these words talking about things that are meaningless, that may or may not be happening elsewhere, that have no bearing on what's happening in this scene, and which will never be resolved. We never know whether the book is made, it gets it off of the planet. He's already set that up earlier. Will the Eldar recover the book or not? Question mark. Okay, that's set up. You've seeded that. Maybe that comes up in a future novel. We don't know. That's an open thread that you're just going to leave. Fine. So why, 4 chapters later, are you asking the question again? You've already said we don't know the answer to this, so don't ask it again and say we don't know the answer to this still. It's frustrating. It's a waste. It's just a waste. I mean, like David, the Viper, absolutely. I don't think that a Viper kit had been released at the time, but I think there's a lot of talk about Vipers. So I think we had the Eldar Codex. I think was 94, 95, something like that. So the Eldar Codex, which I don't know for certain, but I'm assuming has Vipers in it. Like, I think yes, he's talking about Vipers because there's been rules written for them now, but I think that those kinds of things are just like they're like, he's already dealt with that. You don't need to deal with it again, but just reinforce that we don't have any more information. And Anvil, you're saying, for the most part, I found the constant reminders regarding Melindy to work for reinforcing Jack's state of mind. That was good with me. The other stuff, yeah, sure. arguably the Melindy stuff, yes, I will agree. You could get away with like having Melindy be referenced in that way more than once, because this whole book is about bringing Melindy back. But you have like Lex doing exactly the same thing, remembering, oh, will I be accepted back into my brotherhood? Do I remember my brothers that I lost, and so on and so forth. You've already established that. You don't need to establish that again and again and again with no additional new information. So yeah, there's too much of that. There's too much of that for me. So yeah, ultimately, I think, I mean, David, you're saying maybe we should look at this as a collection of short stories. I think that's sort of true. And Lewis, you're saying the short stories in Deathwing are his best work. Yes, I think as a complete piece, yes. But I do think Inquisitor as a book, with its flaws, of which it does have many, I still think Inquisitor as a book has enough like interesting elements to it. It has enough of a sort of, broadly speaking, it has momentum, it has characters, it has arcs, it has the setting up of stakes for a trilogy of books. So everything that happens in Inquisitor kind of gets enough. There's enough material in there to make me excited and to make me look forward to where things will go next. And I guess this brings us full circle back to the Conrad bit. I think that the setup to both Conrad and Inquisitor, whilst those novels they're a bit, they are a bit strung together sequences of events, but they're more cohesive than the very strung together sequences of events that will follow in books 2 and 3 of their respective trilogies. And the trilogies therefore just become these like long strings of random events that are broadly linked together without any kind of satisfaction. There's no narrative drive. Characters are just doing stuff because stuff is what characters do. As opposed to, this is a character on an adventure that we are joining them for, an adventure to save the universe, no less. Let's see how they progress. Let's see how they deal with the challenges thrown at them. Let's see how they chase down the villain. Let's see how they do this and that and the other. What allies join them on this quest? How do they convince them to become a part of it? How do they live and die? And what sacrifices must be made? All of that stuff sort of happens, but it happens at random with very little intervention from our heroes. They just luckily happen to be in the right places at the right times. The universe reshapes itself around the main characters because the characters are quite inert. The characters have no forward momentum in either trilogy, so the entire universe has to move underneath them. Otherwise, you will end the books in exactly the same places that the characters started, because the characters do not move. They don't change, they don't pursue anything, they don't do anything. The universe just happens to them. And that's almost the biggest sin a story can commit. And I think we get it multiple times. So yeah, I know I'm coming down pretty hard on the book. And it is, it's a product of frustration. Like I just found this book and I found the last book to be very difficult to read. I had to force myself to progress through them. And that's a real shame, because when they were good, in the moments when there was something interesting, in the moments when there's a great character idea or there's a cool moment from this universe, it is like, wow, that's great. This is a writer who can who can turn a phrase or who can come up with something cool. But then I had to slog and slog and slog to like get through the rest of it. I think I could, I felt like I was one of the characters when they were going through the desert as the planet is baking and there's nothing to drink, and I just wanted to drink a little bit of that, of that character development, or a little bit of that plot progression, and I was not being afforded any, and I was dying of thirst for chapter after chapter after chapter. And it's a shame. It was disappointing. And then, yeah, we'll get to the end of the book. A shocking moment for sure. They make it to this, to the crossroads, to the center of the webway, where the characters are going to use what they've learned, I guess, over the course of the trilogy in order to bring Melindy back. They're not going to use it to save the universe. They're not going to use it to take out the Harlequin man. They're not going to use it to stop the Eldar. They're not going to use it to stop the Chaos. They're not going to use it to find the sons of the Emperor. They're not going to use it to summon the new men. They're not going to use it to actually affect anything at all that they were ostensibly trying to do at the start of this trilogy. All they're going to use it to do is to reset the end of the last novel and bring Melindy back. Brilliant. So they're doing that, and they do. You have Raquel, who obviously has been built up to know that she's going to be sacrificed in this way, and she does not want it. But Watson has Raquel let everybody off the hook in the final scene. Instead of having her reject this sacrifice, and instead of having her go, yeah, I'm okay with being forced to die, actually, we have her just say, yeah, you know what, I guess it's okay. I guess you've got to do it. And bear in mind, as I say, this is not to save the universe or anything like that. This is just to bring back the woman that Jack loves. So it's a totally selfish act that Jack is about to commit. And he's forgiven for it by the victim of this crime, which I found quite objectionable. There's no consequences to Jack for like all of the things he's done to Raquel. And like I say, there's some really dark stuff. There's like a scene earlier on when Jack leads her away from the dining room table, and it's very clearly suggested that he's taken advantage of her, because when they come back to the table, he's like slightly different in character, and she's like shivering, and like she's a victim of abuse. It's really, really dark. This guy is an out-and-out villain at this point, and he's forgiven by the victim of that crime and many crimes. And then, so that's really irritating, actually. And yeah, because then you also he actually is forgiven, like in a karmic sense later on, because when he becomes aware of the universe, he thinks that maybe Raquel is still out there in the universe a little bit, so maybe he's not such a villain actually, because maybe she's fine too. It's like, man, you're trying to get away with like letting him off for all of this. So it is bleak. It's super bleak. But yeah, so she forgives him. She is sacrificed. Melindy comes back out of the warp somehow. It's not really explained. I guess it doesn't really matter too much. But yes, she comes back, and she comes back in the moment of her death, and she was fighting against Jane Sarzo. So, like, she goes into combat mode, and she fights everybody, and she runs off, and she's kind of feral. And then Jack, almost instantly, is just like, oh no, what have I done? I've failed. Not because he's not guilty. He doesn't feel guilty about any of this. He's just like, oh, maybe she's not Melindy after all. Like, I guess if she's going to attack me, then she's not my Melindy then. So he gets really sad, and then he very, very, very quickly is able to convince Lex that he's been corrupted by chaos, and Lex just shoots him in the head, which is shocking and is and for want of a better word, it is a cool moment, right? It is a moment that's surprising. You kind of don't think it's going to happen. I think it's then quite good that Grimm is like, I don't think he was possessed, which I thought was quite funny. But yeah, you have this odd moment. So Jack is killed. Lex and Grimm, very easily over it, are just like, well, I guess we'll go back and we'll join that war, and we'll get back involved with whatever's happening out in the world. Maybe we'll find Melindy one day. So Melindy's run off. Lex and Grimm are just going to go back and get into the fight, and then the spirit of Jack is like loosed upon the webway, and he's now a sort of ethereal, disembodied soul. And he can kind of see Melindy, and he's like, oh, maybe actually I was too hasty, and she will remember who she was soon enough. And that's when he also is like, oh, and also Raquel's still alive in there somewhere, so I guess I didn't kill Raquel. That's okay. And that's the end of the book. And yes, probably there was going to be some continuation of this story, but it is such an unsatisfying conclusion. With all of the pieces that have led to this point, I really, genuinely can't understand how Watson didn't sit down and go, right, I've actually made Jack Draco into a really bad guy. I think he is a bad guy, and this should be the moment that reveals that. And like, he actually is a bad guy, and like, he is possessed by chaos, and he has turned evil. Like, the way the novel ends is like, oh, I guess he is still a hero of the Imperium then. And yeah, you can be like, well, the Imperium's full of bad guys, so like, the heroes of the Imperium are gonna be bad guys. I guess that's fine. But in terms of like this novel's arc, this trilogy's arc, I just don't think it's satisfying to like have the big thing at the end be like, okay, Jack's still a noble guy on his noble quest. He's done all of this evil stuff, but he's like still willing to die for the Imperium in some sort of way. And Lex is still a good guy because he'll still kill someone who's possessed. And Grimm is still a good guy because he kind of, actually, Raquel still being alive means he didn't break his oath even. Like all of this kind of stuff. It's just, it lets everybody off the hook. And there's no consequences for anybody. Even Jack, who is killed for his evil actions and his impulsive selfishness, even he survives as some Webway spirit. And he's like, I've got access to all of the information of the Webway and the Black Library and whatever else. So, like, even he has no consequences. Megatron, you forgive him too. Okay, fair enough. Zingbo, main characters who actually have little influence on events. Have you read many William Gibson novels or several of Ian M. Banks' Culture novels? Come to think of it, I've not read either. I've not read any William Gibson. I have Neuromancer on my shelf, and it's been there for years, but I haven't read it. I've never read any of the Culture. I understand it's very, very good, but yeah, I've not read it. I'm not saying that novels have to be about the main character of the universe, but I do think that they ought to, even if they don't influence events an awful lot, they should learn from them. Otherwise, why are we following this character? What are we getting from following this character? I think that's my frustration with Conrad, and it's my frustration with Jack Draco stories, is that this character doesn't deserve to have a story about them, because they don't do anything. They make terrible choices or evil choices. There's no consequences for them. And when they make these choices, they don't actually do anything. The things just happen about them. It's so frustrating to me. But yeah, and again, this is my preference. That's how I feel about it. Everyone's mileage will vary. I imagine if I had read these, had I been able to make my way through them when I was a lot younger, then I probably would have had a lot more time for them. They might have felt big, grandiose. They might have felt like adventures across the universe, all kinds of things happening, loads of cool stuff from these games that I love just, turning up. Oh, look, there's a Chaos Space Marine turning up, and there's this other thing I've read about turning up. That's cool. I just fought them on the tabletop. How ace is that? So I can understand why people might have a lot more time for it than I have. It's been a while for me, but I seem to remember there was enough contrived occult. Maybe this will help or be necessary for also achieving the more altruistic goal. Not super convincingly, but there was some magical logic in there, though. It's horrific for sure. Yeah, I think arguably the whole thing is well, Melindy comes back, and that will allow me, Jack Draco, to complete my quest to save the universe. I think it's a problem when this is the third and final book in a series, when you're still putting off saving the universe till next time. We'll do that next time. This time we're just gonna arrange all the books on our shelf and tidy the living room. It's why not make this book about saving the universe? That's the story I'd like to read. Let this one be that story instead of the cleaning the living room story. We don't need that story. Jump ahead. They had talked about Lex potentially having to shoot Jack at least once or twice throughout the novel. That worked for me. Of course, a Space Marine would just be prepared for a summary execution. Yeah, and it's fine. It is a good moment and makes perfect sense if you're Lex is still a good Space Marine and Jack is possessed or was put on a good show. It's just very it lacks in satisfaction for me, because it doesn't mean anything. Killing Jack Draco means nothing because there's no stakes to it. So, like, had this novel actually been about saving the universe, and had Jack's sacrifice and death prevented the saving of the universe or prevented something else from happening, then great. There's stakes there. Jack dying means something. As it is, this is a character who is an evil villain who is portrayed as a noble hero who is about to be killed, and it's the end of a book, and there's a couple of pages left, and there's no subsequent book, and he's never going to save the universe. So who cares? Like, I don't care. Like, okay, it's shocking, yes, because it's, you know, a main character is not supposed to die in this way, but also this is a main character who did nothing, achieved nothing, is not an interesting or good person. Like, he's not even an interesting villain because the book doesn't believe he's a villain. So, like, it's like, what am I supposed to feel about it? People could be monstrous in some ways while good in other ways. I don't know. It really worked for me as a bleak open ending. I mean, and that's great, Anvil. This is very much my feelings on it, and I know, I hope that people enjoyed it. I'm sure many people have. It's been around for a long time. It's been republished many times. Lots of people have read it. I'm just one guy, and I'm coming at it from a modern perspective, both in terms of storytelling and in terms of the 41st millennium and in terms of what's possible in this kind of space. I think that obviously colours my perspective on it. I will say that, like, regardless of the particulars of the story, I'm no expert in this, but I've studied film and I've spent a lot of time watching a lot of films, and although I'm regularly saying I've not read that on these streams, I have read a lot of books. I just haven't read a lot of genre, like science fiction books. I've read a lot of H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, and a lot of, like, other novels, classics, and all that sort of stuff. I've not read a lot of, like, the novels that probably directly influence this kind of stuff. And I think that there are fundamental failures in the storytelling in this book and in this trilogy. Like, I think in terms of just as how the book is written and how it reads as a result, there are, I think, errors. And I know that's probably not my place to say, but just, as a critic, if you like, I think that there are fundamental failures. There is an over-reliance on Deus Ex Machinas and arbitrary resolutions and coincidence and convenience, and none of that within the text is sufficiently explained by fate or the hand of the Emperor or the influence of chaos or anything like that. It just happens because it happens, and it's not satisfying as a result. So that's ultimately my feeling on the whole thing. Like, it just doesn't work as a set of stories because the stories are broken, I think. Jack had a bad dream about the Emperor's children. I guess that's something bad that happened to him. Sure, yes. I mean, I guess, yeah, he did. I mean, yeah, he suffers pain at times, and things don't work out for him in some ways. You never save the universe. No one does. It shows the bleakness of real world. X does evil for the good of people, but the good never happens. Nothing changes. All die. So, yeah, right. Okay, so, Peter, I think that's a really interesting point, and I absolutely agree. And I think that bleakness is a part of the grim, dark nature of the 40k setting. I don't think that's what this book is doing, though. Like, I don't think that this book is intentionally setting out to say, okay, look, even with the greatest and most noble of heroes on a quest to complete something, that they are stymied in their ability to effect change because nothing changes in this universe. Like, that's not the moral of this story, I don't think. That's not what Ian Watson is trying to say, I don't think. And the reason I don't think that is because, actually, Jack Draco's not trying to save the universe. Like, he says he's trying to save the universe once or twice, but this book explicitly makes it about trying to bring Melindy back. That's what he's trying to do. He spends this entire novel, every step he takes, and it doesn't take many, but every step he takes is to bring Melindy back to life because he's obsessed with her, and he does achieve that. So he does change the universe for himself. He's selfish, and he is successful. I don't think the book is trying to say, oh, look, you can't, even a good guy, even the last good men in the universe, doing their best, traversing the webway, overcoming all of these obstacles, chaos and Eldar, they are still not able to change the universe, even when they strive to do so. That's not what this book is saying. Because they do change the universe, but the way they change the universe is in a really selfish way. And it's not about the broader, like, 40k is bleak and unwinnable, because they don't try to win. They're not trying to win, I don't think. Anvil. I think the bleakness and the ineffectualness of the protagonist really works for the setting. I thought it was great. Fair enough. I think I'm undervaluing how directed Jack was throughout the story. Ineffectual, and I agree, the pacing of the book is completely terrible. But Jack is actually doing stuff to address his situation in a very different way, in my opinion, to how Conrad is just kind of knocked from situation to situation by other people doing stuff to him. I do agree the book series have similar issues, but I do think Ian gives his characters, Jack especially so, better motivations and things to do, even though it's ineffectual in terms of progressing very much at all. I agree with almost all of your criticism, but there's just something different with the protagonist's attitudes that's very different for me compared to Conrad. I think that's fair, and I actually think I agree. I think you're right in that Conrad is even more buffeted by events than Jack and his cohort are. Conrad literally has no intention. Like, I suppose that's there's no intentionality to what Conrad gets up to. He does just, like, it's thing to thing to thing. Here, there is a sort of an intention. Well, I guess Jack intends to bring Melindy back, so everything is in service of that. It just so happens that most of what Jack does is, like you say, it's ineffectual. But it happens anyway because things fall into his lap constantly. So there's a lot of stuff in this that plays like one of those bad episodes of Next Generation, where they end, or Voyager, where the characters are not on the spaceship. They spend the entire novel, like the entire episode, on a planet pretending to be from that planet, sort of undercover, and you get all the local problems, and you never get to see the starships, and you don't get to see any of the cool technology, and there's something weird happening on the planet that's affecting everybody. And our heroes just are kind of there. And yeah, by the end of the episode, they get off of the planet and continue with their merry adventures in space. Like, it's that for a huge portion of this book. They're just on this planet, Sabulorb. Not that, yes, they want to translate the Book of the Ranadandra from the Eldar, but how were they going to do that? They were thinking about breaking into the courthouse. Okay, how are they going to do that? Luckily, a thief turns up. Luckily, the thief knows somebody who can get them into the courthouse. Luckily, she's got access to a finger that they can burn that turns into a magic spell, so she's invisible. Luckily, the guys who have got the things she's stealing say it to her and tell her about it and give it to her, and luckily she gets out unharmed without any kind of issues. And that is just one element of what happens. This happens again and again and again. Luckily, an Eldar guy turns up. Luckily, the Chaos turn up to move the plot forward. Luckily, the Eldar turn up to stop the Chaos from killing everybody. Luckily, this thing happens. Luckily, that thing happens. Luckily, this other thing happens. Jack is not doing any of this. It just is happening. And sure, he makes the odd decision within it, but things just constantly happen to allow him to move forward, even though he's like, I guess we need to do this next. How are we going to do that, boss? I hope a thief turns up. Like, it's this kind of thing. That's what frustrates me about it. Peter, being bounced around and stuff happens to you and you can't do anything about it, that is like the story of people in Russia, both real and literature. Yeah, I mean, that's again, a really valid point. And I think self-kidding yourself that your selfishness is the good of the people is very Russian too. Raskolnikov kills the lady to right the social wrongs, but he does it just for the money and he can't use it. Yeah, I mean, yes, I get what you're saying. I just think that there is not enough. Like, yes, that could absolutely be the point. That could be the point. But I don't think it is the point. That if it is, I don't think that's the point that Watson was trying to make. Maybe I'm underestimating Watson here as well, but the way it reads doesn't feel like this is a sort of an examination of that inability to move forward and the way in which the universe can just, be like a storm at sea and you're just in it. You're not on a ship, you're just floating in the sea and it is just going to do what it's going to do to you. Like, I don't think that's the point. I think when you read Inquisitor through Harlequin and into Chaos Child, I think Jack Draco is set up as a heroic character, a main character who is in command of his own destiny. And sure, there are things that stop him from achieving his aims, but I don't think that he has a lot of agency, not because the universe denies him agency, but because Watson denies him agency. So Ian Watson could have written a story where Jack is constantly trying to do stuff. He comes up with good ideas. He gets so far and then he's prevented from doing anything else. That's not what happens. Jack Draco doesn't constantly come up with good ideas and attempt them. He waits for an idea to occur that is probably something convenient. So it's convenient that, I'm just using this as the prime example, but it's convenient that a thief turns up in his house who looks a lot like Melindy. Oh, well, I guess that means that I can put Melindy's soul into this body then. I guess it also means that this Melindy-esque thief can rob the courthouse for me. That's not Jack Draco coming up with ideas and being prevented from delivering on them by the universe. That's the universe giving him everything he needs so that the plot can continue. I think I admire the perspective, and I think that could be a really interesting way of writing a version of that. But I don't think if that is what Watson was going for, I personally don't think he achieves it. Anvil, I would absolutely believe that Watson was writing this with a slightly different ending in mind. Learned he wouldn't get a fourth book and then have them all die at the end instead. I just happen to like that as well a lot. But he doesn't have everybody die because he only has Jack die. Melindy's still alive. She's back. And Raquel's in there somewhere. And we've got Lex and Grimm just going off as a buddy cop duo for further adventures. So he kills Jack off, and it is quite arbitrary. And yeah, I can imagine that there would have been, had a fourth book materialized, then maybe it would have gone in some other direction. There's still enough of Jack Draco's ethereal spirit for there to be a fourth book with Jack Draco had that been commissioned. But yeah, I think it's a bleak ending, but in a sort of silly way to me, because there's no what did Lex and Grimm achieve by doing any of this? What did Melindy achieve by working with Jack Draco? What did Jack Draco achieve? Nothing. And yeah, maybe that speaks to Peter's point about you can't do anything in the 40k universe. It's eternal war. That it will always be the same no matter where you start. You'll end in the same place. And I think that maybe would make sense. But we're going on a big adventure. We're going on a big adventure for 4 books to sort of find out what these characters are going to do. So at least let's have some adventure in the middle of it. Maybe the journey would have justified the end of Nothing Changes if it had been fun on the journey. But not only does nothing change by the end, there's no consequences for anything that happens, but the stuff that happens was really dull and frustrating on its own. So the journey isn't the point, and the ending is not the point. What was the point? That's where I'm at. Yeah, I say luckily, but you say praise be to him on earth. And Darwin, it does sound chaotic. And again, I think if this is the story of corruption by chaos, it's much stronger. I think the ending undermines that a little bit, but I choose to see these novels as the journey of an Inquisitor to chaos, and the corruption of a Space Marine on his side, and even the corruption of an assassin, Imperial assassin, as a result. So, I think if that's the kind of perspective, then it's a way more satisfying story for me. Like that's the bleakness. Like I would have preferred the bleak ending to be if so imagine it plays out exactly the same right up until that moment when Jack, instead of pretending to be possessed, it becomes apparent that no, he is actually evil now. Like he is the Chaos Child. It has been born. He's now a creature of chaos, a villain, out and out. And Lex is going to shoot him, but then Lex doesn't shoot him because Lex has also been corrupted by chaos, and we've watched it happen in real time, but it was incremental enough that not only did he not realize he'd been corrupted by chaos, but we didn't realize it either. And the bleak ending is that these guys were all touched by chaos multiple times over the course of this series, and it had an effect. That is the bleak ending that I think is stronger. That's how I would have liked it to end. Peter, maybe you're right. Watson ain't it? But most of my literature is Eastern European, and the whole floating things happen. The heroes, even if they write as heroes, have no agency. The universe giving you things so that the heroes think they have agency, only to grind them down and show how nothing matters, is such an us plot device. Lex and Grimm achieve nothing. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. Yeah. So I think that's where I'm at. So I'm sorry to say that, I was a bit disappointed by Chaos Child and by the Inquisitor trilogy as a whole. I think, as I say, there are some great ideas here, some really fascinating moments, and some cool science fiction concepts. I don't think there are satisfying storylines. I don't think that there are compelling characters. And I don't think that, for me at least, it's a successful trilogy. There is probably more that I would leave than I would take from these. But the things that I'm not going to say that there's nothing from these stories that is going to stay with me. There's loads of stuff that's going to stay with me because there is a lot in these books, even though they're a drudge and they're slow at times. There's loads of things in here, but there's just a lot of misses. There's way more misses for me than hits, and because it took so long to get through it, it really felt like trudging through the sort of the mire a lot of the time. I don't think I felt that with Inquisitor. I think Inquisitor flowed much more quickly and was more interesting, and it kind of set up a lot more interesting stuff. Harlequin was a bit of a letdown in that it didn't really deliver on any of those things, but again, had some cool ideas and some cool moments. Chaos Child, given that it did have the conclusion on its shoulders, was just a big letdown. It spent so long doing things that just, for me, were not interesting. We're burning through pages, and we're not progressing anything. And I don't mean that in the sense of, not progressing anything of saving the universe. It's fine if it's not possible to save the universe. If that's the point. But we weren't even progressing the story. We were just sitting around. It just felt really slow. So yeah, a disappointment. A disappointment, I'd say. I don't want to deny Ian Watson's influence, as we talked about. Dan Abnett in particular has taken a lot from Ian Watson. I think you can very clearly see a lot of other authors, designers, and fans of 40k have taken a lot of stuff from these books. So I certainly don't want to undermine any of that. I think all of that makes a lot of sense. I can see why that's the case. But yeah, overall, not a book I think I'll revisit. I'd be very surprised if I revisited it. Maybe one day. I don't know. I'm very, very glad to have read it. I'm very glad to have read the whole series now. But it really doesn't. It was a downer. It was a downer ending, not because of the ending, not because it was like, oh, this is a bleak ending. It was a downer because it was just like, oh, that's it. That's all you've got. I wanted more. I wanted more from it. So yeah, it's a bit of a disappointment. I think I'm not going to do a sort of full tier list, but I do think that the Chaos Child would be quite low in any kind of, whether that's the Boxtree or the GW books or the entire GW books and Boxtree series. I think Chaos Child's quite low in my reckoning. Harlequin a little bit higher, but still low. And then a big jump up for Space Marine, and then a jump again for Inquisitor. So, Yeah, not great. Not great. But yeah, we've done it now. So I don't know what the future of the sort of GW Book Club live streams will be. I think I'll come back for something on a future live stream. I'm not sure what that book is going to be yet. Possibly a non-Games Workshop. A non-Games Workshop book. I'll tell you what. Let's give you the. They see Martha having a little sleep there. So yeah, probably a non-Games Workshop book. I think potentially. So maybe Starship Troopers. I was thinking about something like that. There's a couple of fantasy books, like influential fantasy books, that I'm considering. Maybe one of those could be what we read next. I don't know, but I'll share on my Patreon and on my Discord and elsewhere as well, like whatever it is I decide on and when that will be. Apologies for the not as much notice for this session. I moved this one back. So yeah, it wasn't when I was expecting it to be, but there you go. But I really appreciate everybody joining me for this chat. It's been really, really interesting. Apologies for going off on a rant and sort of really getting maybe a bit too passionate. I don't know. Like I say, it just didn't work for me, and and it's hot, so I'm feeling that frustration more keenly, I guess. David, all the early trilogies run out of steam pretty quick. I think that's fair. I think that's definitely how I felt about it. But yeah, there you go. Another GW Book Club live stream complete. More live streams. I'm pretty confident we'll get some more at some point in the future. I have got more stuff coming out on the Patreon. I've been doing some stuff that is like game book live plays. Oh, a couple of good suggestions there. So, Anvil, you're thinking that maybe I know Dracula. I mean, I'm on the precipice of reading Jack Yeovil or Kim Newman, his Orgy of the Blood Parasites, which is one of his first books, one of his earlier books. I don't know that would necessarily be a book club book, but yes, I think it's worth having a look. And Foundation, David. I'd very much like to read Foundation, actually. So that's a really good shout as well. So that's possible. Yeah, that's possible. I'm gonna have a little think about some of these. But yeah, I think probably a non-GW book for the next one, but one that has had an influence on Games Workshop. This is still the GW Book Club after all. So something that has influenced the writers of Games Workshop's worlds and games and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'll share information on that once I've decided. I enjoyed Angry Jordan. Where was he during Conrad? I just don't understand. I think I got a bit passionate about the final Conrad. If memory serves, I think I did go on a few rants about that one because I all similarly came in a bit disappointed, a bit frustrated by that third part. I think I was more understanding of the second part because I still had hope. But yeah, I think the third part did get me a little frustrated, I would say. So he was there. And it's only because the potential, I can see the potential, I think, is why it's so frustrating to me, especially with the Ian Watson books, because I think Watson is a good writer. I think there is some really good stuff. It just, the potential, I think, is squandered a bit. But there you go. So if you want more stuff from me, check out the rest of the channel. Obviously, I just published a video about the Chaos Warriors, brand new Chaos Warriors for Warhammer the Old World, looking at some of that development history. And there was the Space Marine Scouts video last week. Some cool stuff coming up over the next few weeks on the channel, so hopefully you'll enjoy those. And patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery if you want more access to more of my thinking and criticism and all that sort of good stuff. Loads of things on there if you're interested in that. But for now, I will say goodbye and thank you again for taking part. It's been really, really good fun. And I hope the rest of your evening is a good one. So I'll see you later. Thanks so much.